I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer on a rainy Tuesday. My husband Nicholas packed his bags the following weekend, saying he couldn't handle the stress of a sick wife. 6 months later, after my unexpected inheritance of $42 million from my estranged aunt, his tearful face appeared at my doorstep, begging for a second chance. The phone call from my doctor came while I was preparing Nicholas's favorite dinner. I remember the weight of the words malignant tumor settling in my chest as I gripped the kitchen counter, my knuckles turning white. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The salmon was still sizzling in the pan as the doctor's voice faded into a distant echo. Cancer. At 34. With no family history. Nicholas came home to find me still standing there, the meal now burnt beyond recognition. The smell of charred food hung in the air as I told him the news, my voice surprisingly steady. His face changed in that moment, not with grief or shock, but with something I couldn't quite place. Looking back, I now recognize it as calculation. "We'll get through this," he said, pulling me into an embrace that felt hollow, his arms stiff around my shoulders. I believed him because I needed to. Because after 7 years of marriage, I thought I knew the man I had built a life with. 3 days later, I found him packing a suitcase in our bedroom. When I asked what he was doing, his response cut deeper than any surgeon's scalpel ever could. "Can't do this, Sabrina," he said, not meeting my eyes as he folded his expensive shirts I had ironed countless times. "I'm not built for this kind of stress. I never signed up to be a caretaker." I stood in the doorway, the fresh surgical markings from my biopsy still bandaged beneath my sweater, watching as he methodically removed himself from our shared life. There was no anger in his movements, no passion, just the efficient actions of a man who had made a cost-benefit analysis and found the numbers wanting. "What about in sickness and in health?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Nicholas paused, a pair of polished shoes in his hands. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of shame cross his face, but it vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. "That's just something people say," he replied with a shrug. "Nobody actually expects it to happen." He left that evening with 2 suitcases and our joint savings account emptied. I later discovered he'd been planning his exit for weeks, gradually moving money and speaking with a lawyer about how to protect his assets. The cancer diagnosis had merely accelerated his timeline. I faced my first chemotherapy session alone, sat through the cold drip of medications with only a kind nurse for company, lost my hair without a spouse's reassuring words that I was still beautiful, navigated the labyrinth of medical bills and insurance claims while battling exhaustion that seeped into my bones. Friends expressed shock at Nicholas's abandonment. His colleagues, people who had dined in our home, who had toasted our anniversary just months earlier, avoided my gaze when we crossed paths. His family sent generic get-well cards, but offered no practical support. It was as if my illness had made me radioactive, dangerous to be around for too long. I learned to drive myself home from treatments, keeping a bucket in the passenger seat for when the nausea became overwhelming. I learned which neighbors I could call at 3 a.m. when the pain kept me from sleeping. I discovered the specific heaviness of lying in a CT scanner, imagining the machine could somehow detect not just the cancer in my tissues, but also the betrayal that had metastasized in my heart. Through it all, Nicholas sent precisely 2 text messages. The first, a week after he left. "I've had my mail forwarded to my new address." The second, a month later. "My lawyer will be in touch about the house." Then came the unexpected twist in my story. As I was nearing the end of my treatment regimen, weaker, but with promising scans, I received another life-changing phone call. My Aunt Olivia, who had distanced herself from our family decades ago after some long-forgotten disagreement with my father, had passed away. Unexpectedly, she had left her, entire estate to me. I had met Aunt Olivia only a handful of times in my life. She was eccentric, unmarried, and according to family lore, difficult. What none of us knew was that her lifelong frugality and shrewd investments had built a fortune. The lawyer's voice was matter-of-fact as he informed me that I was now the beneficiary of $42 million, a sprawling vineyard estate in the valley, and a collection of art that belonged in a museum. The irony wasn't lost on me. While cancer had stripped me of so much, my health, my hair, my husband, my sense of security, this unexpected inheritance was offering me a new kind of freedom. As I sat in my empty house, still weak from my last round of chemotherapy, I allowed myself a small, bitter laugh at the universe's strange sense of timing. 3 days after the local newspaper ran a story about the mysterious millionaire's surprise heir, Nicholas's number appeared on my phone. I let it go to voicemail. He called again the next day, and the next. I didn't listen to the messages. Then, on a Sunday morning, much like the one when he had walked out 6 months earlier, he appeared at my door. He was thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and a bouquet of lilies, my favorite flowers, clutched in his trembling hands. "Sabrina," he said, his voice breaking with emotion that seemed almost convincing. "I've made the biggest mistake of my life." I stood in the doorway, my hair just beginning to grow back in soft wisps across my scalp, my body still bearing the marks of the battle it had fought without him. The diamond ring he had once placed on my finger was long gone, sold to help pay for medications my insurance wouldn't cover. Nicholas took a step toward me, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. I was scared. I panicked. But I've realized what matters in life. I want to make things right. I want to come home, I said, nothing as I looked at this man I had once loved so completely. This man who had vowed to stand beside me through anything. This man who had calculated the value of our marriage and found it wanting when faced with illness, only to recalculate when millions entered the equation. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the days I had spent alone in hospital rooms, all the nights I had wrapped my arms around myself because there was no one else to hold me as I shivered from the treatments. In that silence was also the new strength I had found, forged in the crucible of abandonment and illness. I did not raise my voice when I finally spoke. I didn't need to. "You already showed me exactly who you are, Nicholas," I said, my gaze steady on his tear-stained face. "Now I'm going to show you exactly who I've become." I said nothing as I stood in the doorway, my gaze steady on Nicholas's tear-stained face. 6 months ago, when I needed him most, he had calculated his way out of our marriage. Now, with money in the equation, he had calculated his way back. But Nicholas had overlooked something crucial in his calculations. I was no longer the same woman he had left. What he didn't know as he stood on my doorstep with those lilies was that I had already set something in motion that would change both our lives forever. My Aunt Olivia hadn't just left me money. She had left me wisdom, connections, and a blueprint for justice that would make Nicholas's return attempt the biggest miscalculation of his life. 3 days after his tearful appearance at my door, Nicholas would be called into a meeting that would shatter his carefully constructed future. The look on his face when he realized exactly what my inheritance meant for him would be something I'd remember for the rest of my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I went from abandoned cancer patient to the architect of Nicholas's reckoning, you need to know what happened in those 6 months after he walked out. The first week after Nicholas left was a blur of disbelief and practical nightmares. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed, now just my bed, trying to process the dual shocks of cancer and abandonment. The house felt cavernous and cold, as if the walls themselves were absorbing my isolation. The most pressing issue wasn't emotional, but financial. Nicholas had been our primary earner, his 6-figure salary at Harrington Global Solutions covering our mortgage and most of our expenses. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My work as a program coordinator for an arts education nonprofit had always been more passion than profit. We had joint accounts, of course, but within days of his departure, I discovered those accounts had been systematically emptied. I called him in a panic, my body still sore from the biopsy that had confirmed my diagnosis. It went straight to voicemail. 3 times. When he finally responded, it was via text. Contacted a lawyer. They'll handle the financial separation. Focus on getting better. That cold, clinical message was the moment I truly understood what was happening. This wasn't a temporary panic or an emotional breakdown. This was calculated. Nicholas hadn't just left me. He had strategically exited a situation he had deemed unfavorable to his interests. I sat on the bathroom floor that night, clutching my phone, wondering how the man who had held my hand through food poisoning, who had surprised me with weekend getaways, who had once written me love notes hidden around our house, could reduce me to a liability to be managed. The practical challenges mounted quickly. Our health insurance was through Nicholas's employer. While legally he couldn't remove me immediately, I knew it was only a matter of time before he would try. The mortgage was in both our names, but without his income, making payments would be impossible within months. And then there was the cancer itself. Invasive ductal carcinoma, stage 3, aggressive. The treatment plan my oncologist outlined was comprehensive and terrifying. Surgery, followed by 6 months of chemotherapy, radiation, and years of hormone therapy. The anticipated cost, even with insurance, was staggering. 2 weeks after Nicholas left, I received a formal letter from his attorney, Theodore Blackwell, a sharply dressed man Nicholas had golf outings with twice a month. The document outlined Nicholas's desire for a swift divorce, favorable asset division, and his suggestion that we sell the house to avoid unnecessary emotional attachment to material possessions. The letter arrived the same day I lost the first clump of my hair, a physical manifestation of the unraveling of my life. I sat at our kitchen table, the formal legal language blurring before my eyes as waves of nausea from both chemotherapy and betrayal washed over me. I had always believed that crisis revealed character, that difficult times showed you who people really were. Nicholas's response to my diagnosis had certainly revealed his character, but it was revealing something about me, too. Beneath the shock and grief, something else was stirring: determination. That evening, I made 2 decisions that would alter the course of everything that followed. First, I contacted Luisa Vega, a family law attorney known for her meticulous approach to high-conflict cases. Unlike Nicholas's golf buddy Theodore, Luisa had a reputation for thorough investigation and strategic thinking. She wasn't the type to rush settlements or overlook details. "I want everything documented," I told her during our first meeting. Every account he emptied, every bill he left unpaid, every asset he tried to hide. Second, I reached out to my support network, friends I had somewhat neglected during my marriage, colleagues who had offered help I had been too proud to accept, neighbors who had witnessed Nicholas's abrupt departure. Ella, my college roommate who had always been skeptical of Nicholas's charm, arrived the next day with groceries and a notebook filled with resources for cancer patients. My colleague Amelia organized a meal train that ensured I had food during the worst days of treatment. Ted from next door, a retired handyman, fixed the leaking bathroom faucet that Nicholas had been meaning to get to for months. These small kindnesses were lifelines in the darkness. While Nicholas had calculated that I wasn't worth the inconvenience of cancer, these people, some of whom were little more than acquaintances, showed up without calculation or expectation of return. The next few months were the hardest of my life. Chemotherapy ravaged my body in ways I hadn't imagined possible. There were days when walking from my bed to the bathroom required every ounce of strength I possessed. My hair fell out entirely, my weight dropped alarmingly, and the constant nausea made eating a chore rather than a pleasure. Through it all, the divorce proceedings continued like a parallel illness, invasive, exhausting, and seemingly endless. Nicholas contested every claim I made, argued that his career contributions outweighed my own, and even suggested that my medical condition made me emotionally unstable and therefore unreliable in my recollection of our financial arrangements. Attended court hearings wearing headscarves to cover my baldness, sometimes just hours after chemotherapy sessions, determined not to give Nicholas the satisfaction of my absence. His attorney would smirk slightly whenever I entered the courtroom, as if my physical deterioration was somehow amusing, or perhaps advantageous to their case. Nicholas himself avoided looking at me directly during these hearings. He would stare at his phone, whisper to his attorney, study the ceiling. Anything to avoid seeing what his abandonment and the cancer were doing to the woman he had once vowed to love in sickness and in health. It was during this grueling period that I received the unexpected call about Aunt Olivia's passing. Had Nicholas known what that call would set in motion, he might have approached our divorce very differently. But Nicholas had always been prone to a particular form of blindness, the inability to see value in anything that didn't immediately benefit him. That blindness had led him to walk away from our marriage. And now, it was about to lead him right back to my doorstep, where the woman he had abandoned waited with a lesson in consequences he would never forget. The day my life shattered began ordinarily enough. It was a Tuesday in March, unseasonably warm, with cherry blossoms beginning to dot the trees in our neighborhood. I had gone for a routine checkup the previous week, mentioned a small lump I'd discovered during a shower, and now found myself sitting in Dr. Wright's office waiting for results that I assumed would be benign. "I'm afraid it's not good news, Sabrina," Dr. Wright said, her voice gentle but direct. The words that followed, invasive ductal carcinoma, stage 3, aggressive growth pattern, seemed to float above me, as if they were meant for someone else. "I'd like to get you in to see an oncologist this week," she continued, already writing referrals while I sat frozen. "With your age and the aggressive nature of the cancer, we need to start treatment immediately." I nodded mechanically, accepting the papers she handed me, asking questions with a calmness that surprised even me. It wasn't until I reached my car in the parking lot that the reality began to sink in. Cancer. At 34. With no family history. My hands shook as I called Nicholas. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail asking him to come home early from work. My voice cracking only at the end when I said, "It's important." I spent the afternoon in a daze, researching breast cancer statistics and treatment options, making notes as if preparing for a work presentation rather than fighting for my life. This analytical approach had always been my response to crisis. Gather information, create a plan, move forward. It was how I had navigated my parents' messy divorce as a teenager, how I had handled being laid off from my first job, how I had processed the miscarriage we'd suffered 2 years earlier. Nicholas arrived home at his usual time, not early as I'd requested. He loosened his tie as he walked through the door, briefcase in hand, the picture of corporate success in his tailored suit. "What's so important?" he asked, his tone suggesting mild inconvenience rather than concern. When I told him about the diagnosis, I expected shock, grief, fear, the emotions crashing through my own heart. Instead, Nicholas's face showed something else entirely. Assessment. His eyes darkened, his brow furrowed, and his mouth tightened at the corners in the same way it did when reviewing disappointing quarterly reports. "Are they sure?" he asked, setting his briefcase down carefully on the entry table. "Yes," I replied, holding up the referral papers. "I see the oncologist Thursday. They want to start treatment as soon as possible." Nicholas nodded, still standing in the entryway as if reluctant to fully enter the home now marked by illness. "What does this mean for your job? For us financially?" Not, "What does this mean for you?" or "How are you feeling?" but an immediate pivot to practical implications. At the time, I interpreted this as Nicholas processing his shock through practical questions. I didn't yet understand it was a cost-benefit analysis. That night, Nicholas worked late in his home office, the door closed. When he finally came to bed, he lay on his side, facing away from me, his body rigid with tension. I reached for his hand in the darkness. "I'm scared," I whispered. His fingers remained limp in mine. "We'll get through it," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the conviction such words should carry. The next few days passed in a surreal blur. I met with specialists, underwent additional testing, and began assembling the medical team that would guide my cancer journey. Nicholas attended the initial oncology appointment, sitting silently beside me as Dr. Amelia Wright, no relation to my primary physician, outlined the aggressive treatment plan: surgery within 2 weeks, followed by 6 months of chemotherapy, radiation, and years of hormone therapy. "This won't be easy," Dr. Amelia warned, her kind eyes moving between Nicholas and me. "But with strong support systems, patients do much better. Are there family members nearby who can help during treatment?" "It's just us," I answered, reaching for Nicholas's hand. "My parents are both deceased, and we don't have children." Nicholas's hand remained stiff under mine. He asked questions about treatment schedules, success rates, and insurance coverage. All relevant questions, certainly, but nothing about how to support me through the process. That Friday evening, I was in our bedroom folding laundry when I heard Nicholas on the phone in his office, his voice uncharacteristically animated. Curious about what had broken through his recent emotional distance, I moved closer to the partially open door. "I know the timing looks bad," he was saying, his voice lowered but intense. "But this has been coming for a while." "No, this doesn't change anything. The financial separation is already underway. I'm not being cold, I'm being realistic." I froze outside the door, the basket of clean towels still in my arms. Who was he talking to? What financial separation? The conversation continued, Nicholas becoming more frustrated with whoever was on the other end. "Look, Ted, I've made my decision. The papers are being drawn up next week. Of course I care about her, but this changes everything. I never signed up to be a caretaker." I must have made a sound, because Nicholas suddenly stopped speaking. When he resumed, his voice was even lower. "I've got to go. I'll call you tomorrow." I retreated to the bedroom, my mind racing to process what I'd overheard. Nicholas was planning to leave? Had been planning it before my diagnosis? The towels slipped from my grasp, pooling on the floor as I sank onto the edge of the bed. When Nicholas appeared in the doorway minutes later, his expression was carefully neutral. "I was thinking of ordering takeout for dinner. Any preferences?" I looked up at him, this stranger in my husband's body, and asked quietly, "Who were you talking to just now?" His posture stiffened slightly, the only indication that my question had caught him off guard. "Just Ted from work. Some issues with the Henderson account." The lie hung in the air between us, joining the unspoken truths that had been accumulating all week. I could have confronted him then, demanded answers about the financial separation and papers being drawn up. Instead, I simply nodded and looked away. "I'm not very hungry," I said. That night, Nicholas slept in the guest room, claiming he didn't want to disturb me if I was feeling unwell. The distance between us, initially measured in inches across our king-sized bed, had expanded to separate rooms. By Sunday, it would expand to separate lives. I awoke that Sunday morning to the sounds of drawers opening and closing. Following the noise to our bedroom, I found Nicholas methodically packing a suitcase, his movements efficient and detached, as if performing a routine business task. "What are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was painfully obvious. Nicholas didn't pause in his packing. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore, Sabrina." "Because I have cancer?" The words burned my throat. He finally looked up, his expression a calculated mix of regret and resolution. The cancer just made everything clearer. I'm not built for this kind of stress. I never signed up to be a caretaker. 7 years of marriage reduced to a cost too high to bear. I never signed up to be a caretaker. Nicholas's words hung in the air between us as he continued packing, folding his expensive shirts with the same care he'd always shown his possessions. More care, I realized with a jolt, than he was showing me. "What about in sickness and in health?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Wasn't that literally what you signed up for?" He paused, a pair of polished Oxford shoes in his hands. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of shame cross his face, but it vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. "That's just something people say," he replied with a casual shrug that made my stomach clench. "Nobody actually expects it to happen. It's like insurance. You hope you never need it." I stood in the doorway, still in my pajamas, the surgical markings from my biopsy still healing beneath my shirt. The absurdity of the situation struck me suddenly. I was facing a potentially terminal illness, and my husband was treating our marriage like a contract with inconvenient fine print. "So, what's your plan?" I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "You're just going to leave while I'm going through cancer treatment? Start fresh somewhere else while I fight for my life?" Nicholas placed the shoes neatly in his suitcase before answering. "I've rented an apartment downtown. It's closer to the office anyway." He said this as if proximity to his workplace had always been a concern of his, as if this were a practical decision we might have reached together under different circumstances. And what about me? The question escaped before I could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than I wanted him to see. Nicholas straightened, finally looking at me directly. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of regret, the kind practiced by executives delivering bad quarterly news to shareholders. "You'll be fine, Sabrina. You're strong, stronger than I am, obviously." He gestured vaguely toward my chest, toward the cancer lurking within. "The medical insurance will cover your treatments for now. Once the divorce is finalized, you'll get a settlement that should help with expenses." Divorce. He said it so casually, as if mentioning plans for dinner. The word hit me like a physical blow, driving the air from my lungs. We had gone from a married couple facing a health crisis to divorce negotiations in the span of a week. "You've already spoken to a lawyer." It wasn't a question. Theodore Blackwell. He specializes in equitable division of assets. Nicholas reached for his toiletry bag on the bathroom counter. "He'll be in touch with paperwork next week." Theodore Blackwell, the same attorney Nicholas played golf with twice a month. The same man who had attended our holiday party last December, who had raised a toast to Nicholas and Sabrina's enviable partnership. The dots connected with sickening clarity. Nicholas hadn't just decided to leave after my diagnosis. He'd been planning his exit and securing legal counsel before I ever found the lump. As this realization dawned, something shifted inside me. The shock and hurt began to crystallize into something harder, colder. "You calculated this," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "You weighed the costs of staying against the benefits of leaving, and I came up short." Nicholas had the decency to look uncomfortable, his hands stilling on the zipper of his suitcase. "That's a harsh way to put it." "But accurate," I pressed, stepping fully into the room now. "What was the tipping point, Nicholas? Was it the potential medical bills? The inconvenience of hospital visits? Or was it simply that a sick wife doesn't fit your career narrative? Hard to network effectively when your spouse is doing chemo, isn't it?" His jaw tightened, the first genuine emotional response I'd seen from him since my diagnosis. "You're upset, and I understand that. But this isn't productive." "Productive?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. "We're not in a quarterly review, Nicholas. This is our marriage, my life." "And my life, too," he snapped, his composed facade finally cracking. Do you have any idea what this would do to me? To my career trajectory? To everything I've worked for? There it was, the unvarnished truth. In the calculation of our marriage, his ambitions outweighed my survival. Get out. The words emerged with a clarity and force that surprised us both. Nicholas blinked, momentarily thrown by my directness. I'm nearly finished packing. If you could just get out, I repeated, each word precise and deliberate. Take your suitcase and go. Have your attorney contact mine about the rest of your things. You don't have an attorney, he pointed out, an edge of condescension in his tone. I will by morning. We stared at each other across the ruins of our marriage. 7 years of shared history, reduced to a standoff between strangers. I saw Nicholas reassess me in that moment, recalibrating his perception as he registered the steel beneath my shock. This wasn't going to be the clean, efficient exit he had planned. Without another word, he zipped his suitcase and lifted it from the bed. As he brushed past me in the doorway, I caught the familiar scent of his cologne, the one I had given him last Christmas, chosen specifically because it reminded me of our honeymoon in Vermont. The memory collided with the present moment, making me dizzy with the dissonance. Nicholas paused at the top of the stairs. I never wanted to hurt you, Sabrina. This isn't personal. A strangled laugh escaped me. Cancer isn't personal, Nicholas. This? I gestured between us. This is entirely personal. He had no response to that. With a slight nod that might have been meant as an apology, he descended the stairs. Moments later, I heard the front door close with a quiet click. Not even the satisfaction of a dramatic slam to mark the end of our life together. I stood frozen until I heard his car pull away from the curb. Then, my legs finally buckling, I sank to the floor of our bedroom. Now, just my bedroom, and waited for tears that didn't come. In their place was a strange, hollow clarity. The man I had built my life around, the future I had imagined, the partnership I had believed in. None of it had been real. Or perhaps more accurately, none of it had been strong enough to withstand the first real test of our vows. I didn't cry that day. Not when I found the drawers of his desk empty, his important documents already removed. Not when I discovered our joint savings account had been systematically depleted over the past month. Not even when I found his wedding ring left deliberately on the bathroom counter, a silent exclamation point to his exit. The tears would come later, in unexpected moments, while scheduling chemotherapy appointments I would attend alone, while explaining to confused friends what had happened, while waking in the night to an empty bed during the worst of the treatment side effects. But in that moment, sitting on the floor of my bedroom on the day my husband abandoned me, what filled me wasn't grief, but a singular crystalline thought. I would survive this, both the cancer and Nicholas's betrayal. And someday, somehow, he would understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. I just never imagined how spectacular that realization would be. The days after Nicholas left passed in a surreal haze. I moved through our home, now just my home, like a ghost, touching the spaces where his things had been. The wall where his grandfather's clock had hung, the empty side of the closet with only hanging rod visible. The dresser drawers that I couldn't bring myself to fill with my own things. Even more jarring were the things he'd left behind, casual discards deemed not worth packing. A half-used bottle of cologne in the bathroom. Cabinet. A stack of business magazines on his nightstand. 3 pairs of running shoes in the garage, arranged by level of wear. These abandoned possessions felt like physical manifestations of how easily he had walked away, what little value he placed on the life we had built. The silence was the worst part. Our home had never been particularly noisy, but it had contained the comfortable sounds of shared existence. Nicholas's morning shower, his fingers tapping on laptop keys, the specific cadence of his footsteps on the stairs. Now there was only absence, a negative space that seemed to have its own sound. I had to remind myself to eat, to sleep, to continue the basic functions of living. Cancer didn't care that my marriage had imploded. Cancer kept growing, kept threatening, kept demanding my attention even as grief threatened to consume me. 3 days after Nicholas left, a certified envelope arrived from Theodore Blackwell's office. The divorce papers were clinically thorough, outlining the dissolution of 7 years of marriage in precise legal language. Nicholas was seeking an expedited process, citing irreconcilable differences rather than the more honest, inconvenient illness. He offered what his attorney described as a generous settlement that amounted to approximately 3 months of living expenses. I sat at the kitchen table, the formal legal language blurring before my eyes as nausea from emotions, or chemotherapy, I couldn't tell which, rose in my throat. The documents detailed how our life together would be dismantled, the house to be sold, proceeds split according to a formula that favored Nicholas's greater financial contribution, personal property divided according to an attached spreadsheet that Nicholas had apparently prepared in advance. It was the spreadsheet that finally broke me. Every item in our home, from furniture down to kitchen utensils, assigned a monetary value and ownership designation. 7 years of building a life together reduced to columns of assets and dollar amounts. I recognized Nicholas's meticulous formatting, his attention to detail. How long had he worked on this document? While I was getting diagnosed? While I was sleeping beside him, unaware that he was cataloging our possessions for division? I finally cried then. Deep, guttural sobs that came from a place I hadn't known existed within me. I cried for the future I had thought we would share, for the children we had planned to have someday, for the person I had believed Nicholas to be. Most of all, I cried for my own blindness, for not seeing the transactional nature of his love, until it was too late. When the tears finally subsided, I was left with a hollow clarity. I needed help, not just with the cancer that was trying to kill me, but with the divorce that was threatening to leave me destitute while I fought for my life. That evening, I made 2 phone calls that would alter the course of everything that followed. The first was to Luisa Vega, a family law attorney whose name I remembered from a fundraiser I had organized for the arts education program where I worked. Unlike Nicholas's golf buddy Theodore, Luisa had a reputation for thorough investigation and fierce advocacy for vulnerable clients. "Mr. Harrington's settlement offer is insulting," she said after I explained my situation. "Especially considering the timing of his departure and your health status." "Is there anything I can do?" I asked, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "He's already taken most of our liquid assets." Luisa was silent for a moment. "Did he empty accounts after your diagnosis or before?" "I'm not entirely sure," I admitted. "I just know they're empty now." "We'll need to subpoena financial records," she said. "If he began moving assets before filing for divorce, especially knowing about your medical condition, a judge won't look kindly on that." For the first time since Nicholas had walked out, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. Not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor. Possibility. My second call was to Ella, my closest friend from college. We had drifted somewhat during my marriage, partly due to her open skepticism about Nicholas. "He's charming, Sabrina, but there's something calculated about it," and partly due to my own immersion in becoming the perfect corporate wife. "I'll be there tomorrow," Ella said without hesitation when I explained what had happened. "Pack a bag for him with whatever else he left behind. We're burning it in the backyard." I managed a watery laugh. "I'm not sure that's legal." "Neither is being a complete sociopath, but Nicholas seems to be getting away with it so far." Ella arrived the next morning with groceries, cleaning supplies, and a fierce protectiveness that brought fresh tears to my eyes. She helped me prepare for my first chemotherapy appointment, scheduled for the following day, organizing medications, and setting up a comfortable recovery area in the living room. "Have you told your parents?" she asked as we sorted through medical paperwork. I shook my head. My father had died 5 years earlier from a heart attack, and my mother lived in an assisted living facility in Arizona, her mind increasingly clouded by early-onset dementia. Mom wouldn't understand, and I can't add this to her confusion. As far as she needs to know, Nicholas is just at work. Ella's expression softened. So you're facing this alone. Not alone, I corrected, reaching for her hand. I have you, and apparently a very angry lawyer named Louisa. The following day, Ella drove me to the cancer center for my first chemotherapy session. The oncology ward was bright and modern, designed to feel less clinical with muted colors and comfortable recliners. But nothing could fully soften the reality of what happened there, the poison that would hopefully kill the cancer before it killed too much of me. Dr. Amelia met us at the treatment room, her kind eyes taking in Ella's presence and Nicholas's. Absence without comment. She explained the procedure again, detailing what medications I would receive and what side effects to expect. The first treatment is often the hardest emotionally, she said gently, but you're not doing this alone. As the nurse inserted the IV line that would deliver the chemotherapy drugs, I closed my eyes and tried to focus on my breathing, a technique I had learned from the guided meditation app I had downloaded the night before. In and out, present moment only. No past regrets or future fears. But when the medication began flowing, cold and foreign in my veins, a single thought broke through my attempted mindfulness. Nicholas should be here. This was the moment the in-sickness part of our vows was meant for. This was when I needed the person who had promised to stand by me through anything. Instead, I had Ella holding my hand and a folder of divorce papers waiting at home. You okay? Ella asked, noticing the tears that had escaped despite my closed eyes. I couldn't bring myself to lie. No, but I'm going to be. In that moment, sitting in the chemotherapy chair with poison entering my bloodstream to fight the disease, trying to kill me, I made a promise to myself. I would survive this, both the cancer and Nicholas's betrayal. And whatever life looked like on the other side, it would be one built on my terms, not his. I just never imagined how dramatically those terms would change. Nicholas and I met at a charity auction for the arts education nonprofit where I worked. He arrived with a group of financial executives, all in nearly identical charcoal suits, all carrying the same air of entitled confidence. But Nicholas stood out. He actually looked at the student artwork displayed around the venue, while his colleagues clustered near the bar discussing tax deductions. I was managing the silent auction table when he approached, his interest seemingly genuine as he asked about a vibrant abstract painting created by one of our teenage students. This one speaks to me, he said, examining the canvas with surprising attention. There's something raw and honest about it. Amaya painted that, I explained. She's 16, from the West Side neighborhood. This is her second year in our program. Nicholas nodded thoughtfully. Talent like this deserves support. He wrote down a bid that was triple the starting price. I remember being impressed not just by his generosity, but by his apparent sincerity. In a room full of people making calculated donations for social capital, Nicholas seemed to actually care about the art and the students behind it. He asked for my card before leaving. For the program, he clarified with a smile that transformed his conventional good looks into something magnetic. I'd like to learn more about what you do. He called 3 days later, but not about the program. Have dinner with me, he said without preamble. I haven't stopped thinking about our conversation. Our courtship was a whirlwind of thoughtful gestures and seemingly deep conversations. Nicholas brought me coffee during late work nights, remembered which authors I loved, and showed genuine interest in my passion for arts education. He took me to the symphony, to small art galleries, to community theater productions, all things I loved that my previous boyfriends had merely tolerated. You're different, I told him one night, 6 months into our relationship, as we walked along the riverfront. Most guys I've dated don't get why I care so much about arts access for underserved communities. Nicholas squeezed my hand. Most guys are idiots then. What you do matters, Sabrina. You're changing lives. When he proposed after 14 months, on a weekend trip to a mountain cabin, I had no doubts. Nicholas had shown me a man who valued what I valued, who supported my work, who wanted to build a meaningful life together. The early years of our marriage were good, or at least they seemed that way at the time. We bought a modest house in a neighborhood with good schools, planning ahead for the children we would have eventually. We hosted dinner parties where Nicholas would proudly introduce me as the brilliant woman who's bringing art to kids who need it most. We volunteered together at community events, donated to causes we believed in, and talked about making a difference in the world. Looking back, I can see the subtle shifts that I missed then. How Nicholas's career gradually became the centerpiece of our lives. How my job became the flexible one, the one that could accommodate his business trips and networking events. How our dinner conversations increasingly revolved around his colleagues, his stress, his ambitions. 3 years into our marriage, I was offered my dream position, program director at a national foundation that supported arts education initiatives across the country. The salary was nearly double what I was making, the impact potentially enormous. But it would require relocating to Boston. I approached the conversation with Nicholas excited, but prepared to discuss the complexities. I had spreadsheets comparing cost of living, housing options, potential positions for him at financial firms in Boston. I had done my homework, just as he would have. "We need to think about the big picture," he said after I'd presented everything. "My earning potential is higher long-term. It just makes more financial sense for us to prioritize my career right now." His tone wasn't unkind, but it was final, as if he were explaining a simple mathematical truth to someone who just didn't understand the numbers. There was no real discussion, no weighing of my passion against his, no acknowledgement that this was my dream slipping away. I withdrew my application the next day, ignoring the disappointment that settled in my chest like a stone. At the time, I told myself it was a mutual decision, a strategic choice for our shared future. Later, I would recognize it as the moment our marriage shifted from partnership to something more unbalanced. The pattern continued in smaller ways. Holidays spent with his family because they had traditions, weekends structured around his networking golf games, vacations planned around destinations where he had business contacts we could meet for dinner. Each compromise seemed minor in isolation, reasonable even. Together they formed a mosaic of imbalance that I had been too close to see clearly. There had been signs of Nicholas's transactional view of relationships, the friends he cultivated because of their connections, the calculated generosity that always seemed to yield returns. But I had interpreted these behaviors as strategic networking, as smart career management. I never thought I would become another entry in his ledger of assets and liabilities. The most revealing moment came during a dinner party at our home, about a year before my diagnosis. Nicholas was telling a story about a colleague who had taken leave to care for his sick father. "Poor judgment professionally," Nicholas commented, swirling his wine. "Harrison was up for the Westlake account, taking family leave right before the decision? He might as well have handed it to Peterson." One of our guests, a pediatrician named Matthew, frowned slightly. "His father has late-stage Parkinson's. What was he supposed to do?" Nicholas shrugged. "Hire a nurse. Visit on weekends. There are ways to handle these things without derailing your career." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if stating an obvious truth. I remember feeling a flash of discomfort, quickly suppressed. That night in bed, I almost brought it up, almost asked if he really believed that career should come before family in crisis. But I didn't. Perhaps I already knew what his answer would be, and wasn't ready to face what it meant. The irony was that Nicholas had always claimed to value honesty above all else. "Just tell me the truth," even when it hurts," he would say. Yet when faced with my diagnosis, he couldn't offer me the simple dignity of honesty. Instead, he made his exit with vague platitudes about not being built for caregiving and needing space to process. The truth, which emerged later through mutual friends, was far more banal. Nicholas hadn't wanted his lifestyle disrupted. He hadn't wanted to be that guy with the sick wife. He hadn't wanted the complexity of navigating business functions. With someone who couldn't drink because of medications, who might be visibly ill, who would need support rather than provide it. Our marriage, I realized too late, had been built on an unspoken agreement. I would be the perfect accessory to his curated life, and in return, he would provide the stability and success I thought we both valued. When I could no longer fulfill my end of this unwritten contract, when I became a liability rather than an asset, he had simply terminated the agreement. The most painful realization wasn't that Nicholas had left when I had cancer. It was understanding that he would have always left when things got truly difficult. The cancer had just accelerated the timeline of a betrayal that was inevitable from the start. The true imbalance of our marriage became painfully clear as I sifted through the wreckage Nicholas had left behind. Boxes of photographs, financial records, and mementos told a story I had been too close to see. I had been constantly yielding while Nicholas had been steadily taking. When Nicholas was pursuing his MBA 3 years into our relationship, I had worked 2 jobs to support us, my day position at the nonprofit, and weekend shifts at a gallery to make ends meet. I would arrive home exhausted, my feet aching from standing all day, only to spend hours helping him proofread papers or prepare for presentations. "You're amazing," he would say, pressing a quick kiss to my forehead before returning to his studies. "I couldn't do this without you." At the time those words had felt like enough. I believed we were investing in our future, that his success would be our success. I never tracked the hours, the dollars, the sacrifices, because that's not what partners do. Or at least, that's not what I thought partners did. After graduation, when Nicholas received multiple job offers, we made the decision based entirely on his career trajectory. I left a position I loved, relocated to a new city, and rebuilt my professional network from scratch. It took me nearly a year to find a comparable job in arts education, during which time I handled everything domestic, finding our apartment, setting up utilities, making our new place feel like home, all while sending out resumes and networking in an unfamiliar city. This move was the right call, Nicholas declared 6 months in, after receiving his first bonus. He bought me an expensive bracelet to celebrate, a gesture that seemed generous until I realized it cost less than a single month's rent that I had covered entirely from my savings during our transition. When Nicholas's mother needed knee surgery, I took 2 weeks off to help her through recovery while he took important meetings in Chicago. I had barely known the woman, who had never fully warmed to me, but I went because Nicholas said his career couldn't handle the interruption. I emptied my limited personal leave, spending days helping someone who mainly complained about my cooking, because that's what family does. "Mom said you were a lifesaver," Nicholas told me afterward, seemingly oblivious to the deep circles under my eyes, or the fact that I had used up leave I had been saving for our planned vacation. When we needed to cut expenses during a financial crunch, Nicholas had invested in his friend's startup that ultimately failed. It was my car we downgraded, my therapy sessions that were deemed non-essential, my clothing budget that was slashed. Nicholas continued his golf club membership because it was networking, his tailored suits because they were professional necessities, his social lunches because they were relationship maintenance. I had made these adjustments willingly, telling myself this was what partnership meant, sharing the load unevenly sometimes so that together we could move forward. I believed Nicholas would do the same for me if our situations were reversed. Most tellingly, when we experienced a pregnancy loss 2 years ago, Nicholas had been supportive, for exactly 4 days. He had held my hand at the doctor's office, brought me tea and painkillers, fielded concerned calls from friends. On the 5th day, he returned to work and to normalcy, clearly expecting me to do the same. "You can't dwell on this," he said when he found me crying 2 weeks later. "These things happen. We'll try again when the time is right." His response had hurt, but I had excused it as a different grieving style, a pragmatic approach to disappointment. I never allowed myself to see it for what it was: emotional accounting. Nicholas had allocated a specific amount of support that he deemed appropriate, 4 days. And once that had been expended, the account was closed. As I underwent my second cycle of chemotherapy, these memories resurfaced with new clarity. Each recollection was a piece of evidence in the case against our marriage, proof that the balance had always been skewed. For every story I could tell about supporting Nicholas, I struggled to find a comparable example of him supporting me. Ella noticed my preoccupation as she drove me home from treatment, my body weak from the chemicals coursing through my veins. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, glancing at me with concern. "I was just thinking about balance sheets," I said, too tired to filter my thoughts. "Financial stuff? Do you need help with the bills? Because I can—" "No, not that kind of balance sheet. Relationship balance sheets. I was calculating how much I gave versus how much Nicholas gave. The numbers don't add up." Ella was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the road. "They never did, Sabrina. Some of us tried to tell you, but I didn't want to hear it," I finished for her, because admitting the imbalance would mean admitting I had settled for less than I deserved. The conversation lingered in my mind. That evening, as I sorted through more paperwork, Louisa, my attorney, had asked me to document every major financial decision in our marriage, every significant contribution I had made, every sacrifice. The exercise was meant to build our case for a more equitable divorce settlement, but it had become something more, an excavation of 7 years of unrecognized giving. Among the papers was our wedding album, which I had avoided opening since Nicholas left. Now, driven by a masochistic curiosity, I flipped through the glossy pages. There we were, impossibly young and hopeful, exchanging vows beneath a floral arch I had spent weeks designing myself. I paused at a photo of us reciting those vows, remembering Nicholas's words. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams as you support mine, to care for you in sickness, and celebrate with you in health." He had delivered those lines flawlessly, with seemingly genuine emotion. Looking at the photo now, I wondered if he had ever meant them, or if they had simply been appropriate words for the occasion. Another transaction, the cost of getting a suitable wife. A wave of anger washed over me, different from the hurt and betrayal I had been carrying. This was righteous indignation at the realization that I had been playing by rules Nicholas had never intended to follow. I had approached our marriage as a partnership. He had approached it as a business arrangement, with termination clauses hidden in the fine print. As I closed the album, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it to find a message from Nicholas, his first direct communication since walking out 6 weeks earlier. "Heard chemo started. Tough time for everyone. Blackwell says you're being difficult about the house sale. Need to be practical here. Medical bills adding up? No inquiry about my health. No acknowledgement of his abandonment. Just a thinly veiled reminder of my financial vulnerability and an attempt to leverage my illness to expedite the property division on his terms." I didn't respond, but I did something I hadn't done before. I took a screenshot of the message and sent it to Louisa with a simple note. "No more negotiating. He doesn't deserve an easy exit." For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt something like power returning. Nicholas had calculated that I would be too sick, too emotionally devastated, too financially desperate to fight back. He had made a fundamental error in his assessment, one he would soon come to regret. I just didn't know yet how monumental his miscalculation would prove to be. The turning point came 3 months into my treatment, on a day that began with more bad news. My latest blood work showed concerning levels, requiring an adjustment to my chemotherapy protocol. The new regimen would be more aggressive, with intensified side effects and a longer recovery period between treatments. Dr. Amelia delivered this news with characteristic compassion, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "It's going to get harder before it gets easier, Sabrina. Do you have someone who can stay with you after the next few sessions? The side effects will likely be more severe." I nodded automatically, though I wasn't sure who that someone would be. Ella had already taken more time off work than she could afford. My other friends had been supportive, but had their own lives, their own families, their own responsibilities. Later that afternoon, I sat in the small garden outside the oncology center, taking a moment to absorb the latest setback before heading home. The garden was designed as a respite for patients and families, a place of beauty amid the clinical surroundings. Roses bloomed alongside lavender, creating a fragrant oasis that seemed to exist in defiance of the suffering inside the building. An elderly woman sat down beside me, her headscarf suggesting she was also a patient, though she no longer had the portable IV stand that accompanied most of us. "First time?" she asked, nodding toward the hospital building. "Third month of chemo," I replied. "But first cancer," she smiled slightly at my attempt at humor. "Husband couldn't make it today?" I hesitated, the familiar shame rising in my throat. "He left when I was diagnosed." I expected the usual response: pity, shock, the awkward reassurances. Instead, the woman nodded matter-of-factly. "Mine did too. 34 years ago." Something in her calm demeanor made me turn toward her fully. "How did you handle it?" "Badly, at first," she admitted. "Thought I'd lost everything. Then I realized something that changed my life." She leaned closer, her voice dropping as if sharing a profound secret. "Cancer showed me who truly loved me and who just loved what I could do for them. It was the most expensive and painful sorting mechanism imaginable, but absolutely accurate." She patted my hand and stood to leave. "The disease might take things from you, dear. Don't let it take your self-worth, too. That's a choice." I sat there long after she left, her words echoing in my mind. For months, I had been mourning Nicholas's absence, seeing it as yet another loss among the many cancer had inflicted. But what if it wasn't a loss at all? What if it was a revelation? That evening, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked, for the first time since my diagnosis. Beyond the physical changes, beyond the fatigue evident in my eyes, beyond the hollows where fullness had once been, I searched for the woman I had been before Nicholas, before cancer. She was still there, diminished but present, waiting for permission to emerge again. "The disease might take things from you," I whispered to my reflection, "but not your self-worth. That's a choice." I pulled out a notebook and began to write, my pen moving across the page with increasing urgency. I listed everything cancer had taken from me: my health, my hair, my energy, my sense of security, my husband, my financial stability. It was a sobering inventory of loss. Then, on a fresh page, I began a second list: what remained. My mind, my determination, my friends who had shown up without hesitation, my skills and education, my capacity to rebuild, my future, uncertain, yes, but still mine to shape. As I wrote, a third list formed in my mind: what I had gained. Clarity about who truly cared for me. Freedom from a marriage that had been slowly diminishing me. A fierce appreciation for simple joys, a pain-free day, a meal that tasted good despite chemo, a moment of genuine laughter with Ella. Most significantly, I had gained an understanding of my own resilience. Each day that I got up, took my medications, attended my treatments, and continued functioning, despite everything, was evidence of a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I called Louisa the next morning. "I want to change our approach," I said when she answered. "Change it how?" she asked, her tone cautious. I've been playing defense, reacting to Nicholas's moves, trying to protect myself from his attempts to minimize what he owes me. I want to play offense now. There was a pause, then a hint of approval in her voice. What did you have in mind? I want a full forensic accounting of our finances going back 3 years. I want to know about every account, every investment, every transaction. If Nicholas has been planning this exit for as long as I suspect, there will be evidence. That's going to be expensive, Louisa warned. And with your medical bills. Bill, me for it later, I said with a certainty I didn't entirely feel. This is important. After hanging up, I made another decision that had been forming since my garden conversation. I contacted my employer about returning to work part-time. The nonprofit had been holding my position, offering extended leave that was more generous than legally required. I couldn't manage full-time hours during treatment, but even a partial return to work would provide both income and purpose. My director, Christopher, was supportive but concerned. Are you sure you're ready, Sabrina? Your health has to come first. Health includes my mental well-being, I explained. And right now, I need to remember who I am beyond cancer and beyond being Nicholas's abandoned wife. The following Monday, I returned to the office for the first time in months. My colleagues had transformed a small meeting room into a workspace where I could rest when needed, complete with a comfortable couch and a mini fridge stocked with ginger ale and crackers for nausea. As I settled at the desk, a sense of normalcy washed over me, the first I had felt since my diagnosis. Here, I wasn't defined by my illness or by Nicholas's betrayal. I was Sabrina Foster, program coordinator, valued for my mind and my contributions. I worked 3 hours that day before fatigue forced me to stop. It wasn't much, but it was something, a beginning. A reclamation of part of myself that both cancer and Nicholas had threatened to take away. That evening, as I reviewed curriculum, proposals for an after-school arts program, I felt a shift in my perspective. For months, I had been existing in a state of suspended animation, moving between treatments and rest, between grief and fear. Now I was beginning to live again, differently, yes, but genuinely. Nicholas had calculated that my cancer made me disposable, that I could be discarded without consequences. In doing so, he had inadvertently freed me from the constraints of a marriage that had required me to be less than I was. I wasn't just fighting to survive cancer. I was fighting to become more fully myself. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to eliminate a liability from his life, Nicholas had released a power he had never fully acknowledged. I just didn't know yet how completely that power would transform both our futures. 2 weeks after my return to part-time work, Louisa called with news from the forensic accountant she had hired. "We found something," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Something significant." I was sitting in my backyard, enjoying a rare moment when I felt almost normal. The sun warm on my face, a light breeze carrying the scent of my neighbor's jasmine. The chemotherapy side effects had temporarily receded, leaving me in the brief window of relative well-being between treatments. "What did you find?" I asked, bracing myself. "Nicholas opened a separate account 6 months before your diagnosis," Louisa explained. "He's been systematically diverting funds, selling off joint investments, and converting assets to cash. The transfers were small enough to stay under the radar, 5,000 here, 8,000 there, but they add up to nearly $170,000 over the past year." I gripped the phone tighter. 6 months before my diagnosis? But that's before either. "You knew you were sick," Louisa finished for me. "This wasn't a panic response to your illness, Sabrina. This was premeditated. He was planning his exit regardless. The revelation hit me with physical force, momentarily stealing my breath. Nicholas hadn't left because of my cancer. He had left because of who he fundamentally was. The cancer had simply provided convenient timing and a sympathetic narrative for his exit. "There's more," Louisa continued. We found evidence that he consulted with Theodore Blackwell 8 months ago about what he called options for marital dissolution. He was planning this while you were still planning your anniversary trip. I closed my eyes, memories flashing through my mind. 8 months ago, Nicholas and I had been discussing renewing our vows for our upcoming 7th anniversary. He had seemed enthusiastic, suggesting we invite more people than our original wedding, make it a larger celebration. All while consulting a divorce attorney behind my back. "What does this mean for the divorce?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "It changes everything," Louisa said, professional satisfaction evident in her tone. "Hidden assets during divorce proceedings are taken very seriously by the courts. Judges don't look kindly on this kind of financial deception, especially when the other spouse is facing a serious illness." For the first time since Nicholas had walked out, I felt a sense of leverage. "What's our next move?" "We file an emergency petition with the court, presenting evidence of financial misconduct, and requesting a freeze on all his accounts pending full disclosure. We also amend our response to his divorce filing, seeking a significantly larger portion of marital assets based on his breach of fiduciary duty." The legal terminology washed over me, complex yet somehow satisfying. There were systems in place to address exactly this type of betrayal, mechanisms designed to protect those who had been deceived by the people who were supposed to protect them. "Do it," I said, a new resolve hardening in my voice. "All of it." Louisa paused. "You should know that this will escalate things. Nicholas won't take this lying down. It's going to get uglier before it gets better." "I'm a cancer patient, Louisa. I'm intimately familiar with things getting worse before they get better." I watched a monarch butterfly land on my lavender bush, its wings opening and closing in the sunlight. "Besides, I'm done being the reasonable one. I'm done making things easier for him." After hanging up, I remained in the garden, processing what I had learned. Nicholas's betrayal was even more calculated than I had imagined. While kissing me goodbye each morning, while making love to me each night, while discussing our future, he had been strategically preparing to leave. The anger that rose in me was different from what I had felt before. Cleaner somehow, more focused. This wasn't just about emotional abandonment anymore. It was about justice, about consequences for choices made with full awareness of their impact. I made my first truly strategic decision that afternoon. I contacted everyone in our shared social circle, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and told them exactly what Nicholas had done. Not just his abandonment after my diagnosis, but the newly discovered financial deception that had preceded it. This wasn't about revenge or about damaging his reputation, though it would certainly accomplish both. It was about truth. About removing the sanitized version of events Nicholas had undoubtedly been sharing, in which he was the unfortunate husband who couldn't handle his wife's illness. The responses poured in immediately: shock, outrage, offers of support. Several friends who had remained neutral in our split now firmly aligned themselves with me. 2 couples canceled long-standing golf plans with Nicholas. His boss's wife, a breast cancer survivor herself, sent me a private message saying she would make sure her husband understood exactly what kind of man he had in a leadership position. Nicholas called that evening, the first direct contact he had initiated since leaving. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded when I answered, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Telling the truth," I replied calmly. "Isn't that what you always valued, Nicholas? Honesty above all else?" "You're deliberately trying to damage my reputation," he said. "This isn't about truth. It's about revenge." "No, this is about consequences," I corrected him. "You made choices, Nicholas. Calculated, deliberate choices. Now you get to experience the results of those choices." He was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something smoother, more conciliatory. "Look, Sabrina, we don't need to do this to each other. I know you're hurt, and I understand that. But dragging this out, making it contentious, It's not good for either of us. It's certainly not good for your recovery. The concern for my recovery, so belated, so transparently manipulative, almost made me laugh. My recovery is going quite well, actually, I said. Better since I stopped wasting energy pretending our marriage was something it wasn't. What do you want? He asked bluntly, dropping the pretense of concern. Is this about money? Because if it is, we can revisit the settlement offer. This is about accountability, I replied. And yes, it's about money too. The money you systematically diverted from our joint accounts for months before you left. Did you think I wouldn't find out? His sharp intake of breath told me everything. He hadn't expected this, hadn't calculated, that I would have the resources or the determination to uncover his financial maneuvers. That's a misinterpretation of some standard financial management, he stammered. My attorney will explain. Your attorney will be explaining it to the judge, I interrupted, along with the consultation you had with him while we were still planning our vow renewal. I wonder how that will look to the court. The silence that followed was deeply satisfying, the sound of Nicholas recalculating, reassessing, realizing that his carefully constructed exit strategy was crumbling. This doesn't have to be adversarial, he finally said, his voice tight. We can work something out. Yes, we can, I agreed. Through our attorneys with full financial disclosure and a fair division of assets. Anything less is unacceptable. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Power. Not over Nicholas specifically, but over my own circumstances. I had spent too long reacting to crisis, first cancer, then abandonment. Now, I was taking action, setting terms, determining my own path forward. Nicholas had calculated that I would be too sick, too emotionally devastated, too financially desperate to fight back. He had made a fundamental error in his assessment, one he would soon come to regret. I just didn't know yet how monumental his miscalculation would prove to be. The weeks following my confrontation with Nicholas brought new challenges. My fourth round of chemotherapy hit harder than previous treatments, leaving me bedridden for days. The nausea was relentless, the fatigue bone-deep, and new side effects emerged. Neuropathy that made my fingers tingle painfully, mouth sores. That made eating an ordeal. Through it all, the divorce proceedings intensified. Nicholas, realizing his position was weakening, shifted tactics. If he couldn't intimidate me into accepting a minimal settlement, he would make the process so draining that I would eventually surrender out of exhaustion. His attorney filed motion after motion, requests for detailed documentation of my medical expenses, challenges to my ability to make sound financial decisions while undergoing treatment, demands for an immediate sale of our home. Each required a response from Louisa, each added to my mounting legal bills, and each consumed emotional energy I couldn't afford to spare. He's trying to wear you down, Louisa explained during a phone consultation. I was too weak to come to her office, so we spoke while I lay in bed, fighting waves of nausea. It's a common tactic when the facts aren't in a client's favor. Drown the opposition in paperwork and procedural hurdles. Is it working? I asked weakly. Louisa's voice softened. Legally? No. We have solid evidence of his financial misconduct, and the judge is aware of your health situation. But personally, Sabrina, you need to focus on your treatment. I can handle Nicholas and his attorney. She was right, of course. My oncologist had been clear. Stress could impact my body's ability to recover between treatments. But how could I not be stressed when my financial future hung in the balance? When the home I was recovering in might be sold out from under me? The next blow came in December, 6 months after my diagnosis. I received notification that my health insurance, which had been through Nicholas's employer, was being terminated at the end of the year. He had removed me from his policy during the company's open enrollment period, perfectly legal during divorce proceedings, but devastating given my ongoing treatment. Securing new insurance while battling active cancer proved nearly impossible. The options available to me came with exorbitant premiums and limited coverage. My treatment costs, already substantial, would now be crushing. Louisa filed an emergency motion with the court, arguing that removing my health insurance during active cancer treatment constituted a form of financial abuse. The judge, however, ruled that since the divorce was already in process and Nicholas was no longer legally obligated to maintain my coverage, he had acted within his rights. "I'm sorry, Sabrina," Louisa said when she called with the news. Her usual, professional detachment had given way to genuine anger. "The law hasn't caught up with the reality of situations like yours. There's a gap in protection for spouses with serious health conditions during divorce." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by medical bills and insurance paperwork, a growing sense of desperation tightening around me like a vice. The treatment that was saving my life was now threatening to bankrupt me. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I might survive cancer only to be destroyed by its financial aftermath. Ella came over with dinner I couldn't eat and sat with me as I calculated and recalculated my dwindling resources. "What about selling the house?" she suggested gently. "I know you don't want to, but if it would give you a financial cushion." I shook my head. Nicholas would get half the proceeds, and right now, this house is the only stability I have. I looked around at the home I had lovingly decorated, the one place that still felt entirely mine. Besides, the real estate market is terrible right now. We'd get much less than it's worth. Ella hesitated, then asked, "What about your mother? I know she's not well, but could her care facility help with—" "Mom's care consumes her entire pension." "And Social Security," I explained. "She has nothing extra, and with her dementia progressing, I can't add to her confusion by explaining any of this." As the evening wore on, we explored and discarded options. Personal loans, impossible with my current income. Credit cards, already approaching their limits. Crowdfunding, potentially helpful, but insufficient for the scale of medical expenses I was facing. After Ella left, I found myself in the garden despite the December chill. The plants were dormant now, waiting for spring, their bare branches stark against the night sky. I felt a kinship with them, stripped down to essentials, conserving energy, enduring a harsh season with nothing but the hope of renewal. My phone buzzed with a text. Nicholas, continuing his campaign of passive-aggressive communication. "Heard about the insurance situation. Unfortunate timing with your treatments. Blackwell says you're still refusing mediation on the house. Need to be practical here. Medical. Bills won't pay themselves." The calculated cruelty of it, reminding me of my vulnerability while pretending concern, made me physically ill. He knew exactly what he was doing by cutting off my insurance. He was creating leverage, attempting to force me into accepting whatever settlement terms he offered out of financial desperation. I didn't respond to the text, but I took a photo of the screen and forwarded it to Louisa with a note. Documentation of continuing pattern of financial coercion. Later that night, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that had become my constant companion, I made a list of my assets. It was a depressingly short inventory: my half-interest in the house, which I couldn't access without selling, my retirement account, which would incur massive penalties if withdrawn early, my modest savings, rapidly dwindling, my car, aging but reliable, and my jewelry, including my engagement ring, which I had removed the day Nicholas left, but couldn't bring myself to sell. None of it was enough. Not for the ongoing cancer treatments, not for the legal battle, not for rebuilding my life afterward. For the first time since my diagnosis, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that Nicholas might win, not legally, but practically. That the combination of cancer and financial devastation might simply be too much to overcome. That I might have to surrender to his terms simply to survive. The thought sent me into the bathroom, where I vomited bile into the toilet. Afterward, I looked at myself in the mirror, pale, gaunt, with dark circles under my eyes and a blue scarf, covering my bald head. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. "You will not give up," I told my reflection fiercely. "You will not let him win. Not after everything you've survived." I didn't know how I would manage it. I didn't know where the resources would come from or how I would continue fighting on so many fronts simultaneously. But I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that I would find a way. What I couldn't possibly know was that the way would find me in the form of a phone call from an attorney I had never met, about an aunt I barely remembered, bearing news that would change everything. The call came on a gray Tuesday afternoon in January, 7 months after my diagnosis and Nicholas's departure. I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing yet another medical bill, trying to determine which part of it might be negotiable, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Assuming it was another collection agency, they had started calling. Despite my payment plans, I almost didn't answer. Something made me pick up on the final ring. "Is this Sabrina Foster?" a formal voice inquired. "Yes, this is she." I braced myself for the usual script about overdue payments. "My name is Penn Whitman. I'm an attorney with Whitman, Jackson and Associates. I'm calling regarding Olivia Montgomery's estate." The name took a moment to register. "My Aunt Olivia?" "Yes. I regret to inform you that Ms. Montgomery passed away last week. As her closest living relative and the sole beneficiary named in her will, we need to schedule a meeting to discuss her estate. Aunt Olivia, my father's older sister, whom I had seen perhaps a dozen times in my life. She and my father had fallen out long before I was born. Their relationship fractured by some ancient slight neither would fully explain. The few times I had met her as an adult, she had been reserved but kind, sending birthday cards with modest checks and the occasional holiday greeting. "I'm sorry for your loss," Penn Whitman continued, filling the silence. "I understand you might not have been close, but Olivia spoke of you with great affection." That surprised me. "She did?" "Yes. She kept track of your career in arts education. She was quite proud of your work." I hadn't known that. Hadn't known she had paid attention to my life at all. The thought of this distant relative silently following my career brought unexpected tears to my eyes. We arranged to meet the following week at the law offices of Whitman, Jackson and Associates. I expected to discuss a small inheritance, perhaps some personal items or a modest savings account. I couldn't have imagined how this meeting would transform my circumstances entirely. The law offices occupied the top floor of a downtown building, the kind of place with quiet hallways and understated luxury that spoke of old money and discretion. Penn Whitman himself greeted me in the reception area, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the careful diction of someone who weighs each word before speaking. "Ms. Foster, thank you for coming. I know this must be a difficult time for you," he said, leading me to a conference room with windows overlooking the city. "My aunt and I weren't close," I admitted as I took a seat. "But I am sorry for her passing." Penn nodded and opened a thick folder. Olivia was a very private person. Few people knew the extent of her affairs, which she preferred. But she was also extremely methodical in her planning. What followed was a revelation that left me speechless. Aunt Olivia, the woman family lore had dismissed as eccentric and difficult, had been a financial savant. After inheriting a modest sum from her parents, she had invested strategically in real estate, technology startups, and pharmaceutical companies, building a fortune that had grown quietly over decades. "The total value of her estate is approximately $42 million, Penn stated, his tone as casual as if discussing the weather. "This includes liquid assets of roughly $18 million, real estate holdings valued at $15 million, and investment portfolios worth approximately $9 million. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "Million? Did you say million?" "Yes, Ms. Foster. Million." For the first time, Penn's professional demeanor softened slightly. Olivia was quite remarkable in her financial acumen. She lived simply but invested brilliantly. "And she left this to me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "All of it?" Penn slid a document across the table. Olivia's will, signed and notarized 3 years earlier. My name appeared clearly as the sole beneficiary. She did, with a few specific instructions that I'll outline for you. As Penn detailed the structure of the inheritance, the properties, accounts, investments, and tax considerations, I found myself thinking not of what this money could buy, but of what it represented. Freedom. Freedom from the financial terror of my medical bills, freedom from the fear of losing my home, freedom from Nicholas's power to harm me economically. "There's one more thing," Penn said, reaching into a drawer. "Olivia left this letter for you. She asked that you read it privately." He handed me an envelope with my name written in elegant script. I slipped it into my purse, uncertain I could read it without becoming emotional. "How soon?" I hesitated, feeling somehow greedy for asking. That is, when would the assets be accessible? "The liquid portion of the estate can be transferred relatively quickly," Penn explained. "We've already filed the necessary paperwork. The real estate and investment portfolios will take longer to fully transition, but we can arrange for income from those to be directed to you immediately if needed." If needed. The understatement almost made me laugh. I thought of the stack of medical bills on my kitchen table, the maxed-out credit cards, the threatening letters from collection agencies. "That would be helpful," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. As we concluded the meeting, Penn handed me his card with his direct number. "Call me anytime with questions, Ms. Foster. Olivia was very clear that your well-being was her priority." The privacy of my car, I finally opened Olivia's letter. Her handwriting was distinctive, precise yet flowing, much like her speech had been during our infrequent meetings. "Dear Sabrina, if you're reading this, I've finally run out of time. Don't waste any sympathy on me. I've lived exactly the life I chose on my own terms, which is more than most can say. You may wonder why I've left everything to you, a niece I barely knew. The answer is simple. I've watched you. From a distance, yes, but with attention. I've seen how you've built your career around bringing beauty and opportunity to children who have little of either. I've seen your dedication, your integrity, your resilience. Money is a tool, Sabrina. Nothing more, nothing less. In the right hands, it can build remarkable things. In the wrong hands, it destroys. I believe your hands are the right ones. You'll find I've left detailed records of my investment philosophy. Mr. Whitman can guide you through them if you're interested. I didn't accumulate this wealth by accident or inheritance. I built it through careful decisions and a refusal to follow conventional wisdom when it seemed flawed. Use what I've left you wisely. Use it to heal, to grow, to create the life you truly want, not the one someone else has designed for you. With respect and confidence, Olivia, I read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it back in the envelope. Aunt Olivia had seen me, truly seen me from a distance I hadn't even been aware of. While I had been pouring my energy into being Nicholas's perfect wife, she had been noticing the work I did, the person I was beyond my marriage. As I drove home, a plan began forming in my mind. Nicholas had abandoned me when I was at my most vulnerable, calculating that I was a liability rather than an asset. Now, with Olivia's inheritance and wisdom, I had the resources to show him exactly how miscalculated his decision had been. For the first time in months, I felt something like anticipation for what was to come. The day after meeting with Penn Whitman, I scheduled appointments with 3 professionals: my oncologist, Dr. Amelia, my divorce attorney, Louisa, and a financial advisor recommended by Penn. My mind was clear for the first time in months, focused on leveraging this unexpected turn of events not just for survival, but for a complete reclamation of my life. Dr. Amelia was visibly relieved when I told her about the inheritance. The strain of watching patients struggle with both illness and financial devastation had left its mark on her compassionate face. "This changes everything for your treatment options," she said, pulling up my file on her computer. There's a new targeted therapy that's shown remarkable results for your specific cancer type. Insurance rarely covers it because of the cost, but if finances are no longer an obstacle. She outlined a modified treatment plan that included both the targeted therapy and supportive treatments to mitigate side effects. The projected outcomes were significantly better than my current protocol, with potentially fewer long-term complications. Why didn't you mention this before? I asked, a thread of frustration winding through my relief. Dr. Amelia's expression was sympathetic but frank. Because it costs nearly $30,000 per treatment cycle, Sabrina. With your insurance situation, it simply wasn't viable. The stark reality of healthcare economics, that my survival chances had been constrained by financial considerations, hit me anew. But now, thanks to Aunt Olivia, I could access the best available care without bankrupting myself. My meeting with Louisa took a different tone. When I explained the inheritance, she allowed herself a rare, genuine smile. This completely changes our strategy, she said, tapping her pen against her legal pad. Instead of fighting for basic survival resources, we can focus on holding Nicholas accountable for his financial misconduct during the marriage. She pointed to a stack of files on her desk. The forensic accountant has continued digging. There's more, Sabrina, much more. Tell me, I said, prepared now in a way I hadn't been before. Louisa pulled out several documents, arranging them methodically. Nicholas didn't just divert funds from your joint accounts. He made several high-risk investments using marital assets without your knowledge or consent. Investments that lost substantial amounts of money. She indicated specific transactions highlighted in yellow. He then used separate funds, money, that should have been disclosed as part of his assets, to cover personal expenses while letting you believe your joint finances were strained. Essentially, he manufactured financial pressure on your household while maintaining a separate, comfortable lifestyle. The evidence was irrefutable. Account statements, transfer records, investment losses carefully concealed through creative accounting. Nicholas hadn't just been planning to leave. He had been systematically insulating himself financially while creating the illusion of shared struggle. This is significant, Louisa continued. It constitutes fraud against a spouse, which can result in punitive distributions during divorce. But there's something else you should know. She hesitated, her expression suggesting she was about to share something particularly unpleasant. What is it? I pressed. Your medical records. Theodore Blackwell has filed a motion for access, claiming they're relevant to determining your capacity to manage significant assets post-divorce. The implication was clear. Nicholas and his attorney were preparing to argue that my cancer and treatment rendered me incapable of responsible financial management, therefore justifying a lopsided asset division in Nicholas's favor. They wouldn't. Get away with that, I said, my voice tight with anger. They might not succeed completely, but the attempt alone would be invasive and stressful, Louisa explained. They're counting on you being too exhausted to fight it. They've miscalculated, I said, a cold clarity settling over me. What do we do? Louisa's smile returned, sharper this time. With your new financial situation, we go on the offensive. We file our own motions for complete disclosure of all Nicholas's accounts, for deposition of his financial advisors, for penalties related to the hidden assets we've already documented. We make it clear that you have the resources to pursue this as long as necessary. My final meeting that day was with Olivia's financial advisor, a straightforward woman named Ella Bennett, no relation to my friend Ella, who had helped my aunt build her fortune over 20 years. Olivia was brilliant with money, she told me, as we reviewed the investment portfolios. She understood market psychology in a way few do, and she had remarkable patience, the ability to wait for the right opportunity rather than chasing quick returns. As we went through the various holdings, something caught my eye on one of the statements. Harrington Global Solutions, I read aloud. Why does that sound familiar? Ella checked her notes. It was one of Olivia's early investments. She provided seed funding during their startup phase about 15 years ago. It's grown into quite a successful financial services firm. The name clicked into place. That's Nicholas's company, I said, my pulse quickening. My husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, works there. He's a senior vice president. Ella raised her eyebrows, quickly typing something into her laptop. Interesting. According to this, Olivia maintained a significant equity position in the company, approximately 15% ownership. 15%? I repeated, the implications dawning on me. What does that mean practically? It means you're about to become a major shareholder in your husband's company, Ella explained. Not controlling interest, but certainly enough to have significant influence, especially if combined with other shareholders. My mind raced with possibilities. And the company wouldn't know about this change in ownership yet? Not necessarily. Olivia held her shares through a holding company for privacy. The transfer paperwork is being processed, but there's typically a lag before all parties are formally notified. I thought about Nicholas, who had built his entire identity around his corporate success, who had deemed me a liability to that success, who had no idea that I was about to become a significant owner of the company he had prioritized over our marriage. Is there a shareholders' meeting coming up? I asked, remembering fragments of conversations when Nicholas would stress about preparing presentations for such events. Ella checked her calendar. Yes, actually. The annual meeting is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. It's when they vote on executive compensation packages and board membership. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt something like anticipation, not just for survival, but for justice. Nicholas had calculated that abandoning me would benefit him personally and professionally. He had no idea that this calculation was about to be completely upended. I'd like to learn more about my rights as a shareholder, I said, my voice steady with newfound purpose. Specifically, about voting shares and attendance at this upcoming meeting. As I left the financial advisor's office that evening, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced since before my diagnosis. Nicholas had abandoned me at my most vulnerable, assuming I would be too broken, too desperate, too consumed by illness to fight back effectively. He was about to discover just how profound his miscalculation had been. The news broke 3 days after my meetings. The local business journal published a small piece about Olivia Montgomery's passing and the transfer of her substantial estate to her niece, me. The article was modest, tucked away in the business transitions section, but it included my full name and a photograph from a charity event years earlier, showing me in healthier days, smiling in an elegant black dress. I hadn't anticipated the article, but I wasn't surprised when my phone began buzzing with notifications shortly after its publication. Former colleagues, distant acquaintances, and even a few strangers found me on social media, their curiosity thinly veiled as congratulations. I responded graciously but briefly to those I knew, ignoring the rest. I had more important matters to focus on. My new treatment regimen had begun, the targeted therapy already showing promising early results. The side effects were different, less debilitating fatigue but more joint pain, fewer digestive issues but more headaches. Still, Dr. Amelia was encouraged by my body's initial response, cautiously using words like remission in our discussions about the future. Meanwhile, Louisa had filed aggressive counter-motions in the divorce proceedings, effectively halting Nicholas's attempts to force a quick settlement. The documentation of his financial misconduct had been submitted to the court, along with a petition for punitive distribution of assets based on his breach of fiduciary duty during the marriage. But the most significant development was yet to unfold. With Penn Whitman and Ella Bennett's guidance, I had been quietly educating myself about corporate governance, shareholder rights, and specifically, the operations of Harrington Global Solutions. The company's annual shareholder meeting was approaching, an event where key decisions about leadership, compensation, and strategic direction would be determined by vote. Nicholas's first text message arrived within hours of the business journal's publication, his name appearing on my phone screen like an unwelcome ghost from the past. Just heard about your aunt. We should talk. I didn't respond. 2 days later, he called. Then again, the following morning. His voicemails grew increasingly urgent, his tone shifting from casual interest to barely concealed desperation. Sabrina, it's Nicholas. I've been thinking about you. A lot lately. Call me back when you can. Hey, it's me again. I'd really like to meet for coffee and catch up. There's a lot I want to say to you. Sabrina, please call me back. I think we made some hasty decisions. We should discuss things in person. Each message confirmed what I already knew. Nicholas wasn't reaching out because he regretted his actions or because he still cared for me. He was reaching out because I was suddenly valuable to him again. I let him persist for a week, his messages piling up unanswered. Meanwhile, I continued my cancer treatment, attended meetings with Penn regarding Aunt Olivia's estate, and finalized my strategy for the upcoming shareholder meeting at Harrington Global. On Sunday morning, exactly 7 months to the day since Nicholas had packed his bags and walked out of our marriage, the doorbell rang. I knew who it would be before I even checked the security camera. Nicholas stood on the porch, a bouquet of lilies in hand, my favorite flowers, a detail he had clearly remembered for this performance. He had lost weight, and his usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. His hair was slightly disheveled, his eyes underscored by dark circles. I took a moment to prepare myself, smoothing the soft blue scarf that covered my still regrowing hair. Then I opened the door but remained in the threshold, neither inviting him in nor stepping outside to join him. Sabrina, he said, his voice breaking with emotion that seemed almost convincing. I've made the biggest mistake of my life. I stood, silently, taking in the man who had once been the center of my world, the man who had vowed to stand beside me through anything, only to calculate his way out of our marriage when faced with the inconvenience of my illness. Nicholas took a step forward, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. I was scared. I panicked. But I've realized what matters in life. I want to make things right. I want to come home. I said nothing as he tried to cross the threshold, my silence more powerful than any words I could have hurled at him. His performative tears slowed as he realized I wasn't going to make this easy for him. Sabrina, please. He extended the lilies toward me. Can we just talk? I looked at the flowers, then back at his face. About what, Nicholas? About how you emptied our savings account the day after my diagnosis? About how you canceled my health insurance during active cancer treatment? Or perhaps about how you were planning your exit 6 months before I ever got sick? His eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected me to know the timeline of his betrayal. That's not... I wasn't... He stammered, the careful script he had prepared clearly failing him. Let me be direct, I said, my voice steady. You're not here because you've had some revelation about love or commitment. You're here because I inherited money. You abandoned me when I needed a partner most, and now you've come back because you think I might be useful to you again. Nicholas's expression shifted, the mask of contrition slipping to reveal calculation beneath. That's not fair. I made a mistake. People deserve second chances. Second chances require genuine remorse, I replied. Not opportunistic timing. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration beginning to replace his manufactured sorrow. Look, I know I handled things badly, but we were good together once. We could be again. I could help you manage the inheritance. I know about investments, about wealth management. And there it was, the real reason for his return. Not love, not regret, but access to Aunt Olivia's fortune. I'm already receiving excellent financial guidance, I said, from the team at Whitman, Jackson, and Associates. Nicholas's expression changed again, this time to confusion. Whitman? Penn Whitman's firm? How did you connect with them? They handled my aunt's estate, I explained, watching as he processed this information. In fact, I've been learning quite a lot about her investments. She was quite brilliant in her strategy. A flicker of unease crossed Nicholas's features. What kind of investments? I smiled slightly. Diverse ones. Real estate, tech startups, pharmaceutical companies. I paused deliberately. Oh, and a significant stake in Harrington Global Solutions. The color drained from Nicholas's face as the implications of my words sank in. His company, his career, his future prospects, all potentially influenced by the woman he had discarded. How significant? He asked, his voice barely audible. 15%, I replied. Enough to have considerable influence at next week's shareholder meeting. The one where your promotion to senior vice president is up for approval, along with your compensation package. Nicholas stared at me, the flowers hanging limply at his side, his carefully constructed plan crumbling before his eyes. You wouldn't, he began, then stopped, clearly uncertain what I might or might not do. Wouldn't what? I interrupted. Vote. My shares according to my assessment of the company's leadership? Exercise my rights as a major shareholder? Why wouldn't I do exactly that? He took a step back, reassessing me entirely. For the first time, he was seeing me not as the wife he had abandoned, not as the convenient stepping stone back to wealth, but as someone with power of her own. What do you want? He asked bluntly, the pretense of reconciliation entirely abandoned. I crossed my arms, feeling strength flow through me despite the lingering fatigue of my most recent treatment. From you? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's what you offered me when I needed you most, and it's all I require from you now. Nicholas's eyes darted nervously, his mind visibly recalculating his position. This doesn't have to be adversarial. We could come to an arrangement, a partnership that benefits us both. A partnership? I repeated, letting the irony of his word choice hang in the air between us. Like our marriage was supposed to be? He flinched slightly but pressed on. I'm talking about being practical here. You have something I need. I have experience you could use. What I need, Nicholas, is what I already have. Freedom from you. His expression hardened. You don't understand the business world, Sabrina. You've never operated at this level. Without proper guidance, you could make serious mistakes. With your aunt's legacy, there it was, the condescension that had always lurked beneath his charming exterior. Even now, facing the reality of my newfound leverage, he couldn't help but assume his inherent superiority. I understand more than you think, I replied calmly. For instance, I understand that Harrington Global's board has been concerned about risk management in the North American division, your division. I understand that your last 2 quarterly reports contained projections that were questioned by several institutional investors. And I understand that your mentor, Edward Phillips, is retiring next month, leaving you without your primary advocate in upper management. Nicholas's face went slack with surprise. I had clearly done more research than he had anticipated. How did you? I also understand, I continued, that you've been pursuing the executive vice president position that's opening up, the one that's being voted on at the shareholder meeting, the one that would come with stock options worth approximately $2.3 million at current valuation. He stared at me, seemingly at a loss for words. The divorce will proceed as scheduled, I stated firmly. And as for the shareholder meeting, I'll be there representing my aunt's interests. I suggest you ensure your performance reviews are impeccable. With that, I stepped back and began closing the door. Nicholas lunged forward, his hand catching the edge. Wait, we should discuss this like adults. Maybe we can come to an arrangement that benefits us both. I looked directly into his eyes, the same eyes that had once held my gaze across the altar, promising forever. There is no us anymore, Nicholas. You made sure of that when you walked out. Now, I suggest you remove your hand before I call the police and report you for trespassing. Slowly, reluctantly, he withdrew his hand. As the door closed between us, I heard him call out one last attempt. You'll regret this, Sabrina. You don't understand how business works. I leaned against the closed door, a sense of calm washing over me. Actually, I whispered to myself, I understand perfectly now. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. With Penn Whitman's guidance, I learned everything I could about my rights as a shareholder and the specific governance structure of Harrington Global Solutions. Ella Bennett arranged meetings with other significant shareholders, positioning my aunt's investment strategy as one focused on ethical leadership and sustainable growth. Meanwhile, according to sources inside the company, Nicholas was in a state of barely controlled panic. He had called emergency meetings with allies on the board, reached out to other major investors, and even attempted to access information about Olivia's estate through back channels. None of it helped his cause. The forensic accounting from our divorce proceedings had been quietly shared with key board members, raising serious questions about his judgment and ethics. His hasty departure from his marriage during my health crisis had become common knowledge within the company, creating discomfort among colleagues who had similar family-first language in their corporate value statements. 3 days before the shareholder meeting, Nicholas made one final attempt to salvage the situation. He sent a settlement offer through Theodore Blackwell, one that was surprisingly generous, offering me the house outright, a substantial cash payment, and ongoing coverage under his premium health insurance policy. The only condition, I would need to sign over my voting rights for the Harrington Global shares to a neutral third party of his choosing for the upcoming meeting. Louisa forwarded the offer with a single comment. He's desperate. I didn't bother responding. Nicholas had calculated my worth once and found me disposable. Now he was calculating again, offering what he thought would buy my cooperation. He still didn't understand that this wasn't about money. It was about justice. The day of the shareholder meeting arrived crisp and clear, a perfect February morning with pale sunshine filtering through bare branches. I dressed carefully in a tailored, navy suit that hung a bit loose on my still recovering frame, a silk scarf covering my slowly returning hair. Ella drove me to the gleaming corporate headquarters of Harrington Global Solutions, a building Nicholas had often pointed out with pride during our marriage. Nervous? She asked as we pulled into the visitor parking area. Strangely, no, I replied, checking my reflection one last time. I feel certain. The security desk had my name on the expected attendees list. The receptionist provided a visitor badge and directed us to the executive conference center on the top floor. As we rode the elevator upward, I thought about all the company events I had attended as Nicholas's wife. Always as his accessory, always introduced in relation to him. Today would be different. Today, I would be introduced as Olivia Montgomery's heir and a major shareholder in the company. Today, Nicholas would understand exactly what his calculations had cost him. The conference room was already filling with board members, executives, and other significant shareholders when we arrived. I recognized some faces from corporate functions I had attended with Nicholas, though few seemed to recognize me. My appearance had changed considerably since my diagnosis. And then I saw him. Nicholas stood near the front of the room, deep in conversation with an older man I recognized as the company's CEO. He looked impeccable as always in a custom suit, but the strain of recent weeks showed in the tightness around his eyes, the forced quality of his smile. He hadn't noticed me yet. I took a seat at the large conference table, arranging my materials precisely before me. Penn Whitman joined us moments later, taking the chair to my right, his presence lending additional credibility to my position. The meeting was called to order. Standard procedures were followed, minutes approved, financial updates provided, routine matters addressed, and then they reached the agenda item Nicholas had been dreading, executive appointments, and compensation packages. As the board chairman began introducing the candidates for promotion, Nicholas finally spotted me sitting calmly across the room. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw raw panic flash across his face before he quickly composed himself. It was, as I had anticipated during those dark days of treatment, absolutely priceless. The shareholder meeting proceeded exactly as I had planned, though not perhaps as Nicholas had feared. When it came time to vote on his promotion and compensation package, I didn't make a dramatic speech about his character or our marriage. I didn't reveal the details of his abandonment or attempt to publicly humiliate him. Instead, I simply asked pointed, professional questions about risk management in his division, his approach to ethical leadership, and the accuracy of his recent quarterly projections. Each question was carefully researched, precisely phrased, and impossible to dismiss as personally motivated. Each revealed my thorough understanding of the company's operations and Nicholas's specific vulnerabilities within them. By the third question, Nicholas was visibly sweating. By the fifth, the CEO was looking at him with unmistakable concern. I never once mentioned our marriage or my illness. I didn't have to. The contrast between my composed professionalism and Nicholas's increasingly defensive responses spoke volumes. When the vote was finally called, I neither supported nor opposed his promotion. Instead, I abstained, noting for the record that I had insufficient information to evaluate the candidate's judgment and long-term commitment to the company's values. It was enough. The promotion was tabled for further review, and Nicholas's carefully cultivated image as a rising star had acquired its first significant tarnish. As the meeting concluded, I gathered my materials and prepared to leave. Nicholas intercepted me near the door, his expression a complex mixture of anger and bewilderment. "Why didn't you just vote against me?" he demanded, keeping his voice low. "Why the performance?" "It wasn't a performance, Nicholas," I replied, calmly. It was governance. I have a fiduciary responsibility to the company now, just as you had a responsibility to our marriage. He flinched at the comparison. "This isn't over, Sabrina." I met his gaze steadily. "You're right. The divorce proceedings continue, and there will be other shareholder meetings. I suggest you prepare more thoroughly for both." I walked past him then, head high, my steps slow but deliberate as I exited. The building that had once symbolized everything I wasn't: corporate, powerful, valued. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nicholas had abandoned me because he believed my illness would hinder his career advancement. In doing so, he had set in motion the very circumstances that now threatened that advancement most directly. The weeks that followed brought resolution on multiple fronts. The divorce was finalized under terms that reflected Nicholas's financial misconduct and my new circumstances. Louisa had negotiated a settlement that was both fair and appropriately punitive, including provisions for him to cover the medical expenses he had attempted to evade. My health continued to improve under the new treatment protocol. The targeted therapy was working more effectively than the standard chemotherapy had, with fewer debilitating side effects. By April, Dr. Amelia was using words like remission with growing confidence. "Your response has been remarkable," she told me during a follow-up appointment. "Not just to the medication, but in general. Stress can significantly impact treatment outcomes, and despite everything you've been through, I'm less stressed now than I was in my marriage," I finished for her. The realization had been building for months, but speaking it aloud made it undeniably true. The constant pressure to be the perfect supportive wife, to anticipate Nicholas's needs, to shape my life around his priorities, all of it had created a chronic tension that I'd carried for years without recognizing it. With Nicholas gone and Aunt Olivia's inheritance providing financial security, I found myself sleeping better, eating more, and healing faster than anyone had projected. Spring brought new beginnings in unexpected forms. I returned to work at the arts education nonprofit, not because I needed the income, but because I valued the purpose. Christopher, my director, worked with me to create a new position focusing on strategic development, leveraging my experience and allowing for the fluctuating energy levels that came with recovery. More significantly, I established the Olivia Montgomery Foundation, dedicated to supporting cancer patients facing financial hardship during treatment. The foundation provided grants for medical expenses not covered by insurance, assistance with housing costs during extended treatment periods, and legal aid for patients dealing with employment or insurance discrimination. It was during the foundation's inaugural board meeting that I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. Seated around the table were people who had stood by me through the darkest moments: Ella, Dr. Amelia, Louisa, Penn Whitman, now united in creating something meaningful from my experience. None of this would have happened if Nicholas hadn't left, I realized aloud, interrupting the budget discussion. If he had stayed, if he had been the husband he promised to be, everything would be different. The room fell silent, everyone uncertain how to respond to this sudden detour into personal territory. "I'm sorry," I said, embarrassed by my outburst. "That wasn't relevant to our agenda." "Actually," Dr. Amelia said thoughtfully, "it might be the most relevant thing we've discussed today. Your experience is why this foundation exists." Penn nodded in agreement. Olivia would have appreciated the symmetry. She believed that sometimes our greatest setbacks lead to our most important contributions. Later that evening, sitting in my garden where new growth was emerging from the previously dormant soil, I considered how profoundly my life had transformed from the moment of Nicholas's departure. The pain had been real. The abandonment, the fear, the physical suffering of cancer treatment without a partner's support. I wouldn't minimize that suffering or pretend it had been anything but traumatic. Yet I couldn't deny the unexpected gifts that had emerged from that trauma. Not just Aunt Olivia's inheritance, but the discovery of my own resilience. The clarity about what and who truly mattered in my life. The freedom to build something meaningful on my own terms. Nicholas had calculated that I was disposable, a liability to be cut loose when convenience dictated. In doing so, he had inadvertently set me free from a relationship that had been slowly diminishing me for years. His abandonment, meant to benefit only himself, had ultimately benefited me, far more profoundly than he could have imagined. I thought of him occasionally, not with longing but with a distant, almost anthropological curiosity. According to mutual connections, he had eventually secured his promotion at Harrington Global, though at a significantly lower compensation level than originally projected. He had begun dating a younger colleague from the marketing department, his social media carefully curated to display his professional success and personal happiness. I hoped, in a detached way, that he had learned something from our ending. That, perhaps somewhere beneath the calculations and self-interest, he had developed a capacity for genuine reflection. But whether he had or hadn't no longer affected me. Last month, I had received a final communication from him. An email sent late, at night, possibly after drinks with colleagues. "Sabrina, I've been thinking about how everything unfolded between us. I want you to know that I regret how I handled things. Not just the timing, but the way I left. You deserved better. I've heard about your foundation. It's impressive. You've always been capable of more than I gave you credit for. I hope your health continues to improve." Nicholas, I hadn't responded. There was nothing to say. The apology, if that's what it was, came far too late to matter. The acknowledgement of my capabilities was something I no longer needed from him or anyone else. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across my garden. In the morning, I had another treatment session, followed by a foundation meeting, followed by dinner with Ella. My life had developed a new rhythm, still punctuated by medical necessities, but increasingly filled with purpose and genuine connection. Nicholas had once been central to my existence, his needs and ambitions, the organizing principle around which I built my days. Now he was just a person I used to know, a character in a chapter that had closed. The cancer had taken things from me, yes. But in the process of fighting it, I had gained something far more valuable than anything I had lost. Myself. 1 year after Nicholas left, almost to the day, I received the news I had been waiting for. Dr. Amelia sat across from me in her office, my latest scan results displayed on her computer screen. No evidence of disease, she said, her professional demeanor briefly giving way to a genuine smile. The cancer appears to be in complete remission, though I had anticipated this outcome based on my improving symptoms, and Dr. Amelia's increasingly optimistic updates, hearing the words spoken aloud brought unexpected tears to my eyes. For months, my existence had been defined by fighting cancer, fighting Nicholas, fighting for financial stability. The possibility of a life no longer centered around these battles felt almost disorienting. What happens now? I asked, accepting the tissue Dr. Amelia offered. You'll continue the maintenance therapy for another year, she explained, and we'll monitor with regular scans. But Sabrina, she reached across her desk to take my hand. This is the outcome we hoped for. This is success. Success. Such a simple word for such a complex journey. As I drove home from the appointment, windows down to enjoy the June breeze, I found myself taking an unexpected detour. Instead of turning toward my neighborhood, I followed the highway out of the city, driving with no particular destination in mind. I ended up at a small lake an hour away, a place Nicholas and I had visited early in our relationship. We had rented a canoe that day, paddling to the center of the lake where the water was clearest. Nicholas had been different then, more present, less calculating. Or perhaps I had simply been unable to see beneath the surface of his charm. Sitting on a bench overlooking the water, I allowed myself to remember that earlier version of us without bitterness. The relationship had been real to me, even if it had ultimately been transactional to him. Denying the genuine happiness of those early years wouldn't change how they had ended. My phone buzzed with a text from Ella. Well, what did Dr. A say? I smiled at her characteristic multiple question marks and sent back a simple response. No evidence of disease. Complete remission. Her reply came instantly. Celebrating tonight. No arguments. As I drove back to the city, I realized I was approaching a new threshold. The immediate crises had been resolved. The divorce was finalized. My health was restored. The financial security provided by Aunt Olivia's inheritance had eliminated the practical concerns that had once seemed insurmountable. For the first time in over a year, I had the luxury of asking myself a deceptively simple question. What did I want? The answer emerged gradually over the following months, taking shape through both careful reflection and unexpected opportunities. The Olivia Montgomery Foundation grew rapidly, expanding from direct patient support to advocacy work, addressing the systemic issues that created financial barriers to cancer treatment. I found myself testifying before state legislators, speaking at medical conferences, and collaborating with healthcare policy experts to draft model legislation. My work at the arts education nonprofit evolved as well. With financial concerns no longer a factor, I was able to focus entirely on impact rather than sustainability. I developed new programs bringing arts education to pediatric hospitals and rehabilitation centers, creating access for children facing medical challenges similar to what I had experienced. Most surprisingly, I discovered a talent for public speaking. What began as occasional talks at cancer support groups developed into a series of workshops on navigating major life disruptions. From Crisis to Clarity, I called the program, sharing both practical strategies and personal insights from my own journey. These professional evolutions were matched by personal ones. I sold the house that had been both my sanctuary and prison during treatment, purchasing a light-filled condo overlooking the river. I resumed the yoga practice I had abandoned years earlier when Nicholas complained about the time commitment. I traveled, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone, to places I had always wanted to visit, but had deferred in service to Nicholas's career priorities. Most importantly, I developed a new relationship with uncertainty. Cancer had taught me that nothing was guaranteed, not health, not marriage, not financial security. Rather than finding this terrifying, I now recognized it as liberating. If nothing was certain, then everything was possible. 2 years to the day after Nicholas walked out of our home and our marriage, I received an unexpected email from him. The subject line read simply, "Congratulations, Sabrina, I saw your interview on the National Health Policy Program last night. Your foundation's work is impressive, and your advocacy for patient financial protection is clearly making an impact. I often think about how differently things might have turned out for us. Not just the inheritance, but everything. I made choices. I regret, though I'm not sure you'd believe that. I hope you're well. You looked well on the program. Healthy, confident. It suits you." Nicholas, I read the email twice, searching for any hidden agenda or manipulation. Finding none, I closed it without responding. Not out of anger or resentment, but because there was simply nothing more to say. Nicholas belonged to a chapter of my life that had closed. What he thought of me, positively or negatively, no longer mattered. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset reflect on the river. My phone chimed with a reminder about my speaking engagement the following day, a conference for healthcare advocates where I would be sharing my story and the work of the foundation. As I prepared my notes, I found myself reflecting on what I had truly learned from the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. Cancer had shown me the fragility of the body, the limitations of medical science, and the profound inequities in our healthcare system. But it had also revealed the strength of the human spirit, the power of genuine connection, and the capacity for renewal even in the darkest circumstances. Nicholas's abandonment had exposed the transactional nature of what I had thought was love, the painful consequences of building my identity around someone else's needs, and the devastating impact of betrayal by the person who had vowed to stand beside me through anything. But it had also freed me from a relationship that had been slowly diminishing me, created space for authentic friendships to flourish, and ultimately led me to discover a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Aunt Olivia's inheritance had provided financial security, professional leverage, and a platform for creating meaningful change. But its greatest gift had been the example of her life, lived on her own terms, guided by her own values, measured by her own definition of success. As I finalized my presentation for the next day, I added a concluding thought that encapsulated what I now understood with bone-deep certainty. The most valuable inheritance isn't money or property or even opportunity. It's the wisdom to recognize your own worth, a worth that exists independent of anyone else's assessment or approval. When you truly understand that your value is inherent rather than earned or assigned, you become immune to those who would calculate that value based on what you can do for them. Sometimes it takes a profound disruption, an illness, a betrayal, an unexpected windfall, to reveal this truth. The challenge then becomes living in alignment with it, not just in moments of crisis, but in the ordinary days that follow. That alignment, that congruence between what you know and how you live, is the foundation of a life that belongs truly and only to you. In the end, Nicholas had calculated that I was disposable, a liability to be discarded when convenience dictated. In doing so, he had inadvertently given me the opportunity to discover just how indispensable I was to myself. That discovery, more than the remission, more than the inheritance, more than the professional success that followed, was the true measure of my journey from abandoned wife to the woman I had become, whole, purposeful, and finally irrevocably free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.